My father, Arthur, was dead. His body was discovered crammed inside the narrow confines of the main drainpipe beneath our house. The thought itself was grotesque, physically impossible. A grown man's body somehow forced while still alive into that suffocatingly small space. But it was the letter he'd written me, one I clutched now with trembling fingers, that sent a true icy chill crawling up my spine. Tucked away within, the familiar lines of his handwriting, almost invisible unless you knew precisely how to look, were two words that seemed to scream off the page. Beware, Eleanor. Deep in the night, the heavy cloak of sleep was torn away by an unsettling sound. It came from the bathroom, a faint rhythmic tapping, like fingernails drumming lightly against ceramic tile. Hesitantly, I slipped out of bed, my bare feet shrinking from the cold wooden floorboards. I tiptoed to the bathroom door and pushed it open just a crack, peering into the darkness. Holding my breath, I listened intently. The sound seemed to be emanating from the depths of the drain set into the floor. Rats, perhaps? A wave of revulsion washed over me. As I turned to leave, dismissing it, a thick, viscous gurgle echoed up from the pipe. Before I could even process the sound, a pool of slick, startlingly bright red blood bubbled up from the drain opening, spreading rapidly across the white tiles like a hideous bloom. A choked, strangled scream tore from my throat. Half an hour later, the familiar gleam of yellow police tape barred the bathroom doorway. I huddled in my mother Eleanor's arms, shivering uncontrollably despite the apparent comfort of her embrace. "It's all right, Clara, it's all right, sweetheart," she murmured, stroking my hair. Though her own face was a mask of pale shock, her grip tight. The grim work commenced as grim-faced officers, their movements heavy with reluctance, chiseled away at the concrete surrounding the drain. Finally, with a sickening wrenching sound, they managed to extract a mangled, horrifically compressed corpse. My eyes, against my will, fixed on the exposed hand, drawn to a distinctive dark mole just below the knuckles. My breath hitched. My world tilted, threatening to collapse. It was my father, Arthur. He'd been forced, impossibly, unbelievably, into that drainpipe while still alive. It defied all logic, all reason. Arthur wasn't a particularly tall man, but he possessed the solid build of a fully grown adult male. I'd heard hushed, horrific whispers of unwanted newborns being disposed of down toilets, tragic and awful tales, but never ever had I conceived that a full-grown man could meet such a nightmarish end. I clutched Eleanor's hand, my fingers digging into her flesh, sobbing uncontrollably, the sound raw and broken in the sudden heavy silence. She quickly shielded my eyes with her hand, pulling me tighter against her body. "Don't look, Clara. Don't look, baby," she whispered, her voice thick with a forced, desperate calm that didn't quite ring true. Arthur's body was quickly, almost efficiently removed, shrouded in black plastic. A search of the house yielded no signs of a struggle, no forced entry, nothing disturbed. The only tangible clue was a single muddy footprint near the bathroom drain. A man size 10, flat-footed, belonging to someone approximately 5'10", the police forensic team determined. A stranger's footprint in our home. My father's bizarre and brutal death became the morbid talk of our small county town, whispered in hushed tones behind cupped hands. On the day of his funeral, the house filled with the quiet murmurs and shuffling feet of mourners, I sat alone in my room, eyes stinging with unshed tears, rereading the letters he had written me over the years. It had been our unique ritual, a silent conversation born from his long, demanding work hours, his endless striving to provide a better life for Eleanor and me. We poured our thoughts, our days, our unspoken affections onto paper. I leafed through the familiar pages, his looping handwriting usually a source of comfort, until one letter, dated only a few weeks prior, made me pause. Something felt distinctly off. The phrasing was awkward, stilted, the sentences clumsy, utterly unlike his usual flowing, articulate prose. "Being young, you were certainly mischievous, Clara, but utterly adorable. Warehouses full of dreams seem to fill your heart, always pushing you forward. Eleanor and I, your mom and dad, both love you more dearly than words can say. Nor should you ever forget your mother is getting older now. Be patient and understanding with her." My eyes scanned the lines again, a growing unease prickling my skin. Then it hit me with the force of a physical blow. A jolt went through me, cold and sharp as ice water. The first word, or the beginning of the first word, of each sentence. Beware, Eleanor. The letter slipped from my suddenly nerveless fingers, fluttering silently to the floor. A horrifying coincidence? Or a deliberate, desperate warning? Just as the chilling implication began to sink in, twisting doubt into nascent fear, Eleanor pushed the door open. She wore a simple, elegant black dress, her face etched with fatigue, drained of all color. Her eyes were puffy and swollen. She'd clearly been crying again, the picture of a grieving widow. "Clara," she said softly, her voice weary. "Come out now, dear. Help me see our guests off." Instinctively, reacting before thought, I scooped up the fallen letter and crumpled it tightly in my fist, hiding it from view. "Okay, Mom." But her gaze didn't meet mine. It fixed, unnervingly sharp, on my clenched hand. An expression I'd never seen before flickered across her features. Intensely watchful, analytical, almost predatory. It vanished as quickly as it appeared. "What's that you have in your hand, dear?" she asked, her voice dangerously smooth, a silken thread drawn taut. A bead of cold sweat trickled down my temple, despite the coolness of the room. "It's just one of Dad's letters to me." Eleanor knew about our letter-writing tradition, but her eyes, dark and intense, never left my hand. "May I see it, sweetheart?" Her voice was soft, almost gentle, a practiced maternal tone. But her eyes held no corresponding warmth, no hint of a genuine smile. They were flat, assessing. My mind raced, desperately seeking a plausible excuse but found none. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. With infinite reluctance, I slowly uncurled my fingers and handed her the crumpled piece of paper. As Eleanor's eyes scanned the words Arthur had written, her own eyes quickly reddened. She took a deep, shuddering breath, visibly fighting back. Tears that seemed this time entirely genuine. "Your father," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "He really did love us so much, Clara." She carefully smoothed the letter and handed it back to me. The flicker of icy suspicion I'd felt moments before dimmed, replaced by a sudden sharp wave of shame. How could I possibly doubt her? My own mother? She was grieving, heartbroken, utterly devastated. She had loved Arthur deeply. The warning in the letter had to be a coincidence, a product of my own overwrought imagination. Later, after the last sympathetic relative had departed, leaving the house steeped in an oppressive silence thick with sorrow and unanswered questions, I found myself drawn to my father's study. Sorting through his belongings felt like another violation, yet a necessary, painful task. A heavy weight settled in my chest, making it difficult to breathe. As I lifted a worn, leather-bound notebook from his desk, a small slip of folded paper fluttered out from between the pages, landing softly on the carpet. I unfolded it. Arthur's familiar handwriting met my eyes. "My darling Clara, if you're reading this note, I fear I'm already gone from this world. Please, my dearest girl, look closely at the photograph we took together about a month ago. Remember that Dad loves you, always and forever." My breath caught sharply in my throat. My heart hammered against my ribs with renewed force. He knew. A month ago, he had anticipated his own death. The grotesque, impossible manner of his end flashed in my mind, coupled with the impossible message from the other letter. A cold sweat broke out on my brow, chilling my skin. On the heavy oak desk sat the framed photograph he mentioned, taken just a month prior as the note said. He'd been working late in the study, the lamplight casting long shadows while I sat nearby, lost in a book. He'd suddenly turned, interrupting the comfortable silence, a slightly forced smile on his face. "Clara," he'd said, his voice unnaturally bright. "I just realized we haven't taken a photo together in ages. Feels like forever. How about one? Right now, just us." It had felt a little abrupt, slightly out of character at the time, but seeing the hopeful look in his eyes, I'd readily agreed. Now, my fingers trembling slightly, I picked up the silver frame, my reflection staring back dimly from the glass. We were smiling side by side in the photo, a captured moment of apparent normalcy, father and daughter. But as I looked closer, my eyes scanning the background details behind us, my blood ran cold. The heavy study door, which Arthur always insisted on keeping shut tight while working, was cracked open just a sliver. My pupils constricted to pinpricks. I leaned closer, peering intently at the photograph, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. An eye, staring directly at us from the sliver of impenetrable darkness behind the door. Unblinking. Malevolent. This was the secret. This was what he wanted me to see. The watcher in the shadows. The hidden observer. The person who had killed him. Or, the chilling words echoed in my mind again. "Beware, Eleanor." At that precise moment, a prickling sensation crawled up my spine, an ice-cold certainty of being watched right now. I whirled around, my breath catching in my throat. The study door was ajar, open just a sliver, mirroring the photograph perfectly. A wave of icy dread washed over me, starting at my feet and flooding upwards. I vividly remembered closing it completely when I came in. Someone had been standing right outside, silent as a ghost, observing my every move, watching me discover the clue. Swallowing down the rising panic, I pushed the door open wider and stepped cautiously out into the hallway. Something small and scarlet glinted on the polished wooden floor just outside the threshold. Trembling, I bent down and picked it up. A fragment of a scarlet acrylic fingernail. It matched the set Eleanor wore perfectly. The thought that my own mother, Eleanor, had been spying on me, standing silent and unseen just outside the door, was deeply, profoundly disturbing. It twisted. Something cold and sharp inside me. Summoning every ounce of courage I possessed, I walked down the hallway and stopped outside her bedroom door. No light seeped from beneath it. The room within was completely dark. My throat felt tight, constricted. On a morbid impulse I couldn't quite explain or justify, I did something I couldn't believe I was doing. I knelt down slowly, pressing my eye to the thin crack between the bottom of the door and the floor frame. My breath hitched violently. Staring back at me from the impenetrable darkness within was a pair of eyes, hideously bloodshot, laced with crimson veins, the pupils dilated almost entirely black, swallowing the iris. They weren't the eyes of the living. They pulsed with a terrifying emptiness. There was a corpse hidden in my mother's room. I scrambled backward frantically, my breath coming in ragged, panicked gasps, only to bump hard against a pair of startlingly cold legs. I looked up in sheer terror. Eleanor stood directly over me, her head lolled onto my shoulder at an unnatural, impossible angle, her eyes tilted unervingly as she looked down at me, a parody of maternal concern. "Clara," she murmured, her voice strangely flat, devoid of inflection. "What are you doing down there, darling?" My heart felt like it would explode, hammering painfully against my ribs. "Mom," I stammered, my voice barely a whisper, grabbing the fabric of her skirt instinctively, seeking an anchor in my swirling terror. I just miss Dad so much." She studied me for a long, unnerving moment, her expression utterly unreadable, her eyes boring into mine as if attempting to peel back the layers of my thoughts. Fine beads of cold sweat broke out across my forehead. Finally, after an eternity, she sighed, the sound heavy and theatrical in the silence. "Oh, Clara. My poor baby. I miss him too terribly. More than words can say. But we have to be strong now, sweetheart. For each other. Life goes on, doesn't it? Your father would want us to live well, to be happy." She pulled me into a sudden stiff embrace. Her body felt strangely, unnaturally cold against mine, chilling me to the bone. Despite the layers of our clothing, I couldn't suppress a violent shiver. As she held me, my gaze fell on the hand resting lightly on my back. The scarlet acrylic nail on her index finger was missing, broken off. The watcher outside the study door had indeed been Eleanor. 1,000 frantic questions screamed in my mind. I wanted to demand answers, to confront her, to scream why, but the words caught in my throat, paralyzed by a primal fear I didn't understand. Instead, forcing a shaky, unnatural smile onto my lips, I looked up at her. "Mom, I don't want to be alone right now. Can I maybe stay in your room with you for a little while?" I had to know. I had to see if that body, those horrifying eyes, were real or just a figment of my fractured grief. To my profound surprise and increasing dread, she agreed without a flicker of hesitation. "Of course, darling. Come in." As she pushed the door open, revealing the dimly lit room beyond, my heart clenched tight, bracing myself for the horror I believed lay within. But the room was immaculate. Tidy, the bed neatly made. I scanned every corner, glanced under the bed, checked the large oak wardrobe. Nothing. No corpse. No sign of anything remotely amiss. Had I imagined it? Had the stress, the grief, the impossible horror of my father's death finally cracked my mind? Was I hallucinating? My burgeoning suspicion warred violently. With years of ingrained memory of maternal love and care, Eleanor had always been meticulous, attentive, fiercely protective. Their marriage, from my childhood perspective, had always seemed strong, stable, a haven of quiet affection, so unlike the constant bickering and tension I witnessed among my friends' parents. Strict, yes, sometimes overly so. But fundamentally she was a good mother. Wasn't she? The icy tendrils of doubt I'd felt clutching at me began to recede again, replaced by a dizzying, disorienting confusion. Come, Clara, Eleanor said softly, patting the space beside her on the quilted bedspread. Sit here with Mama for a while. We'll just be quiet together. We sat together in silence, leaning back against the ornate headboard as we often had in happier times. As she shifted slightly, adjusting her position, her silk nightgown slipped slightly off her shoulder, revealing the pale skin beneath. For a brief, fleeting second, before she quickly adjusted the strap, I saw something just below her collarbone. A strange, disturbing tattoo I had never, ever noticed before. It was a sickly, jaundiced yellow color, depicting a bizarre, twisted, almost nauseating symbol that seemed to writhe even in its stillness. It made my stomach churn with a vague, indefinable revulsion. Before I could get a proper look, or even fully register what I'd seen, she quickly pulled her gown back into place, her movements slightly jerky, perhaps flustered. At that precise moment, a bizarre, muffled noise emanated from directly beneath the bed. It was faint, choked, struggling, like someone gasping desperately for breath through a crushed windpipe. A wet, ragged, horrifying sound. Did you hear that, Mom? I whispered, my body tensing instantly, straining my ears in the sudden silence. Eleanor's face tightened, her eyes widening slightly. Yes, she breathed, her voice suddenly tense, losing its earlier softness. I heard it. Sounds like it's coming from under the bed. She gestured sharply for me to stay put. Stay right there, Clara. Don't move. Taking a deep, deliberate breath, she slid cautiously off the bed, bent down low, and peered underneath the heavy wooden frame. A sharp, piercing, blood-curdling scream escaped her lips, echoing horribly in the confines of the room. I leaped off the bed instantly, my own fear momentarily forgotten in the face of hers. When I saw what lay beneath the bed, my blood seemed to turn to ice, solidifying in my veins. Under the bed lay a woman. The woman whose dead eyes I'd seen through the door crack. Her limbs were grotesquely, impossibly elongated, stretched taut like rubber bands about to snap. Each skeletal hand and splayed foot was brutally pinned to the four corners of the wooden bed frame with large, crude, rusty-looking nails driven deep into the floorboards beneath. And impossibly, terrifyingly, obscenely, she was still alive. Her pupils were utterly blown, vast black voids swimming in the whites of her eyes, yet a horrifying flicker of tortured, conscious life remained within their depths. Her head twisted laboriously, agonizingly, on her horribly stretched neck. Then, slowly, deliberately, her lips stretched into an impossibly wide, horrifyingly mirthless grin, the corners of her eyes crinkling upwards in a ghastly, skull-like imitation of amusement. Her vacant, tortured eyes locked directly onto mine. In the next instant, the last spark of that awful life seemed to extinguish completely. Her head flopped down abruptly, like a marionette whose strings had been suddenly and violently cut. But I knew with a chilling bone-deep certainty that defied logic, that even in the final rictus of death, her vacant, accusing gaze remained fixed squarely, unblinkingly, on me. Eleanor, regaining some composure, her face ashen but her hands steady, called the police again. They arrived quickly, their faces etched with a weary disbelief that seemed to deepen with every new horror our house revealed. They gently ushered us out of the bedroom, their voices low and soothing, assuring us they would handle everything from here. I sat numbly on the edge of the living room sofa, shaken to my core, while Eleanor sat beside me, her arm protectively, possessively around my shoulders. Don't be afraid, baby, she murmured again, her voice a low thrum against my ear. Mama's here. Mama will keep you safe. Inside the dead woman's mouth during the initial examination, the police found a small, tightly balled up, half-chewed piece of paper likely swallowed. In the final moments of terror before death, unfolding it carefully, they found a single name written in frantic, jagged script. George Henderson. Mr. Henderson. Our next-door neighbor. A kindly, unassuming man, always ready with a gentle smile and a friendly wave over the garden fence. He and his wife Martha had tragically lost their only child to a sudden illness 10 years ago and had always treated me with a special warmth, almost like the daughter they never had. The idea of him being a murderer, especially one capable of such calculated, inhuman brutality, was simply inconceivable. It didn't fit. It couldn't be true. The body, now officially Jane Doe pending identification, was zipped into a bag and taken away, leaving an even deeper layer of dread and inexplicable wrongness coating the very air in the house. That night, cocooned in my bed but far from sleep, strange sounds began to echo from the living room downstairs. Thump, thump. A heavy, rhythmic, sickening impact like something dense and solid hitting the wall repeatedly, over and over. The house felt colder than usual, a penetrating, bone-chilling cold that had nothing to do with the frigid winter night outside. Delicate, feathery patterns of frost traced intricate designs on the inside of the window panes, sparkling faintly in the gloom. Shivering uncontrollably, more from fear than cold, I crept out of my room and down the stairs. The living room was plunged into near-total darkness, the curtains drawn tight. Through the oppressive blackness I could faintly discern a shadowy, indistinct figure standing near the far wall. It was rhythmically, sickeningly, banging its head against the plaster, producing the dull, repetitive thuds I'd heard from my bedroom. "Mom!" I whispered, my voice trembling, barely audible even to myself. The figure froze instantly, its body snapping suddenly ramrod straight, unnaturally stiff. "Mom, what's wrong? What are you doing?" I asked, a knot of fear tightening in my stomach. A horrible thought surfaced. Was she breaking under the strain, the grief? Was she hurting herself? The figure's head swiveled towards me with an unnatural, jerky, mechanical motion, as if something unseen, something else, was forcing it around against its will. Her mouth opened wide, impossibly wide, stretching into a grotesque, cavernous rictus. "Clara? Still awake, little bird?" The voice that emerged sent shards of ice through my veins. It was not Eleanor's voice. It was androgynous, high-pitched, piercingly sharp, grating on the nerves like fingernails on slate. And as she spoke, her mouth stretched even wider. I thought I saw tiny, pale, worm-like things writhing deep within the darkness of her throat. I screamed myself awake, heart pounding violently against my ribs, tangled helplessly in my sweat-drenched sheets. A nightmare. Just a terrifying, vivid nightmare. Relief washed over me, weak and trembling. But sleep offered little true refuge after that. I drifted in and out of a shallow, uneasy consciousness for the rest of the night, plagued by a persistent, maddening, tickling sensation on my neck, like trailing strands of hair or the legs of insects. Whenever I reached up instinctively to scratch, the feeling vanished instantly, only to return moments later, teasing the edges of my sanity. In the gray, weak light of dawn, the sudden jarring sound of police sirens pierced the morning quiet, jolting me fully awake. I sat bolt upright in bed, my mind still fuzzy. As I swung my legs over the side, preparing to get up, my gaze fell upon my pillow. Scattered across the white cotton, stark against the fabric, were several strands of long black hair. My own hair was shoulder length, cut short over the summer break. This hair was much longer. It was Eleanor's length. A horrific, sickening image flooded my mind with brutal clarity. Eleanor standing silently over me in the dead of night as I slept, her head bowed low, her long dark hair brushing, tickling against my exposed neck. The thought sent a fresh wave of cold sweat cascading down my back, making me feel nauseous. But before I could fully process the terrifying implication, I saw flashing blue and red lights through my bedroom window. Several police officers were purposefully entering the Hendersons' house next door. 5 minutes later, George Henderson emerged, flanked by 2 uniformed officers, his hands cuffed securely behind his back, his head bowed in defeat, his shoulders slumped. My heart hammered against my ribs, a sickening, dizzying mix of disbelief and encroaching dread swirling within me. Could he really be the killer? Gentle Mr. Henderson, who always had a pocket full of candy for the neighborhood kids, who mourned his own lost child so deeply. Could he truly be capable of such monstrous, inhuman acts? Suddenly, as if sensing my intense gaze, he looked up. His eyes locked with mine across the short expanse of lawn separating our houses. They were wide, utterly filled with desperation and stark terror. His mouth opened and closed, forming a single silent, urgent word. "Run." Just as the word registered, a jolt running through me, his eyes darted to a point just behind me, widening further in what looked like sheer abject terror. He jerked his head down abruptly, refusing to look again, his body trembling. I turned slowly, already knowing what I would see. Eleanor stood right behind me, silent as a shadow, her fingers resting lightly, proprietarily on my shoulder. They were trembling almost imperceptibly. Her expression was a complex, unreadable mixture of profound sorrow and barely suppressed, simmering fury. "Clara," she said, her voice strained tight. with emotion. I have something incredibly difficult to tell you. Something you won't want to believe. They found the man who killed your father. Who killed Dad? I whispered, the words feeling like ashes in my mouth, though I already knew the answer she was programmed to give. It was George Henderson, she stated, her voice hardening, gaining a sharp edge. The police found the murder weapon hidden in his house. It had your father's blood on it, Clara, and that poor woman's blood too. The muddy footprint in our bathroom? It perfectly matches his work boots. And that pathetic little note found in the woman's mouth? The lab confirmed it only had her fingerprints on it. She must have written his name herself in her last moments before he silenced her. They were such good friends, Clara, your father and George. I just don't understand why he would do something so terrible, so monstrous. Her voice broke convincingly at the end, and she choked back a heart-wrenching sob, covering her face with her hand. Listening to her carefully constructed narrative, something felt profoundly, fundamentally wrong. It was all too neat, too perfectly packaged, too convenient. The incriminating footprint, the note conveniently identifying the killer, the readily discovered murder weapon, the killer who tortured his victims with inhuman, calculated cruelty. Why would he suddenly become so inexplicably careless, leaving such a clear, damning trail of obvious clues pointing directly, unequivocally, to himself? And Mr. Henderson's desperate, silent warning run, coupled with his stark, naked terror when he saw Eleanor standing behind me? Why would my father's supposed killer be utterly terrified of my grieving mother? Doubt coiled again in my stomach, cold and heavy as lead, but I didn't voice it. I couldn't. The fear was too paralyzing. Just then a sharp, authoritative knock echoed through the house. Eleanor quickly wiped her eyes, composing her features into a mask of weary grief, and opened the front door. Two familiar police officers stood on the porch, and between them, looking utterly broken, stood Mr. Henderson in handcuffs, his face ashen and gaunt. One of the officers looked from Eleanor to me, his expression softening with a touch of professional pity. The suspect insisted on coming here, he said quietly, his voice gruff but not unkind. He says he needs to apologize to you both. Regardless of anything else. Eleanor's eyes, red-rimmed and swollen, blazed with fury as she stared at Mr. Henderson. Why? She cried out, her voice raw with anguish, vibrating with pain. Why did you kill him? Why, Arthur? What did we ever do to you to deserve this? Mr. Henderson's gaze lingered on Eleanor's distraught face for a long, charged heartbeat, then shifted deliberately to me. Suddenly, with a surprising burst of desperate strength, he lunged forward momentarily, breaking free from the officer's startled grip. He leaned close, his face inches from mine, whispering frantically, urgently in my ear, his breath hot and smelling faintly of fear and stale coffee. Then the officers reacted, grabbing him again, wrestling him back forcefully, their faces grim. Eleanor immediately, instinctively, pulled me behind her, shielding me with her body as if from a physical threat. As they dragged a struggling, now silent Mr. Henderson away down the path, his whispered words echoed relentlessly in my mind, chilling me to the very core. He had said with frantic, desperate certainty, "Don't trust any of them, Clara. Not even the police. They're part of it. I didn't kill your father or that woman. The real truth. It's all in my diary. There's a secret compartment under the floorboards in my bedroom. Find it." A little later that day, my heart still pounding like a frantic drum against my ribs, a heavy stone of dread sitting in my stomach, I knocked hesitantly on the Hendersons' front door. Martha Henderson opened it, her face ravaged by grief and shame, her eyes red and swollen from weeping. The moment she saw me standing there, she crumpled to her knees on the doorstep, bowing her head low, over and over again in a gesture of utter supplication. "I'm so sorry, Clara, so terribly sorry," she sobbed, her voice muffled. "Please forgive us, please forgive George. Please." I quickly bent down and helped her up, murmuring awkward reassurances, my own emotions a confused tangle. Shaking visibly, she pulled a worn bank card from the pocket of her cardigan. "Here," she whispered urgently, pressing it firmly into my hand. "Take this. It's our savings, everything we have left. $10,000. It's not much, I know, but please take it. As some small compensation for the terrible thing George did." I gently but firmly refused, pushing the card back towards her. Deep down, in a place logic couldn't quite reach, I didn't believe her husband was the killer. The pieces didn't fit. Auntie Martha, I said softly, choosing my words carefully. May I? Could I possibly see Mr. Henderson's room? Just for a moment? I just need to. She looked puzzled, her grief-stricken eyes clouded with confusion, but after a moment's hesitation, she nodded numbly, stepping aside to let me pass. His room was on the second floor, small and tidy, smelling faintly of pipe tobacco and old books. Making sure Martha hadn't followed me up the stairs, I closed the door quietly behind me and immediately began searching the old wooden floorboards near the bed, running my fingers over the planks, just as George had instructed. Near the worn patch beside the bedside table, I found a single board that felt slightly loose under pressure. Using my fingernails, I managed to pry it up carefully. Beneath it lay a small, hidden compartment cut into the joists. And inside, just as he'd promised, lay a worn brown-covered diary. My fingers trembling with anticipation and fear, I opened it. The entries, written in George's neat, slightly slanted handwriting, began about a month ago, coinciding almost perfectly with my father's growing unease. October 10th. Lately I can't shake the feeling of being watched. A constant prickling on the back of my neck, like unseen eyes following my every move. October 14th. I found the source of the watching. God help me, it's Martha. I woke up unexpectedly in the dead of night. She was squatting beside the bed, perfectly still, just staring at me in the darkness. And she was smiling. That awful, empty, terrifying smile. October 20th. I've discovered something truly monstrous, something terrifying about this town. Every year precisely in April 3 people die here. Always 3. And the death, they're horrible, bizarre, unnatural. Things that simply shouldn't be possible by normal means. And every single victim going back years, they're like me. Outsiders. People who moved here from somewhere else. Tucked carefully between the pages of this entry were several yellowed, brittle newspaper clippings, meticulously cut out, detailing gruesome murders from the past few years, all occurring in April. April 1st, 2019. Local woman found dismembered in home toilet tank. Husband made discovery when flushing water ran blood red. Police baffled. April 5th, 2019. Visiting salesman falls from motel bed, less than 3 feet high. Official cause of death. Massive skull fracture consistent with fall from extreme height. No explanation. April 22, 2021. Tourist staying at B&B found deceased in locked wardrobe, body completely drained of blood. No entry points found. Cold sweat beaded on my forehead, trickling unpleasantly down my temples. It was just as Mr. Henderson had written, 3 gruesome, inexplicable deaths every April. A pattern. A ritual. And this month was April. With shaking hands, I turned to the last entry dated just 1 week ago. April 10th. It's April again. The dread is suffocating. I finally understand the terrible secret of this town. I know with chilling certainty that I will die this month. They've chosen me. Whoever finds this diary, please, I beg you, be careful. Beware anyone with a strange yellow mark or tattoo on their body. Remember this warning. Please remember. Suddenly, I heard distinct footsteps ascending the stairs, slow and deliberate. I quickly shoved the diary back into the hidden compartment, replaced the loose floorboard, smoothing the rug over it, and tried to compose my features into an expression of calm sadness as I opened the bedroom door. Martha stood there on the landing, holding the bank card out to me again. Her expression insistent beneath the layers of grief. Clara, please, she pleaded, her voice thick with tears. I really truly want you to have this. My conscience won't be clear otherwise. Please, dear, you must take it. She pressed it firmly, almost forcefully, into my hand, closing my fingers around the cool plastic. As my fingers closed around the card, my thumb brushed against the magnetic strip on the back. I felt something rough, uneven. Looking down, I saw it tiny, almost invisible letters scratched meticulously into the dark strip, like the writing of an ant. Leave this place. Now. Get as far away as you possibly can. I looked up sharply, my eyes meeting hers, searching her face for confirmation, for any sign. But Martha just gave me a sad, watery, guilt-ridden smile, her eyes conveying nothing but sorrow, as if nothing unusual had happened, as if she hadn't just passed me a desperate, silent warning. That night, Martha Henderson died. Her body was discovered by a concerned neighbor the next morning, folded impossibly inside her own large, upright refrigerator in the kitchen. There were no signs of forced entry into the house, no indications of a struggle anywhere. It was almost as if she had simply opened the heavy refrigerator door herself and climbed inside willingly. But the most horrifying, the most utterly inexplicable detail whispered later by the paramedics, who had seen the scene. Her head had been torn clean off her shoulders, a ragged, brutal separation. Yet there were absolutely no wild animals known to frequent our county, certainly none capable of such an act, and no animal tracks were found anywhere near the house. She was found sitting eerily upright inside the cold confines of the fridge, cradling her own severed head carefully in her lap, like a grotesque, beloved doll. I watched from my bedroom window, hidden behind the curtain, as they carried her shrouded body out on a stretcher later that morning. Suddenly, a sharp gust of wind whipped the corner of the white sheet up for a fleeting, horrifying second. In that instant, I saw Martha's severed head loll sideways on her lap, turning impossibly towards my window. Her eyes, previously closed in death, snapped wide open, staring directly, accusingly, terrifyingly at me with an impossible preternatural intensity. A visceral, paralyzing chill shot through me, rooting me to the spot, and I stumbled back from the window, my breath catching in my throat, a strangled gasp escaping my lips. When I dared to peek again moments later, heart pounding, her eyes were closed once more, her face serene in death. Her pale, bluish forearm dangled lifelessly over the side of the stretcher as they carried her away. And there, starkly visible on the pale, dead skin of her forearm, was the same strange, twisted, sickly yellow tattoo I had glimpsed briefly on Eleanor's shoulder, the same mark George Henderson had warned about in his final, desperate diary entry. The yellow mark. 3 people were dead this April. My father, Arthur. The unknown woman tortured and killed under Eleanor's bed. And now Martha Henderson. The pattern held. The horrifying prophecy of the diary, the town's dark secret, was unfolding exactly as foretold. 3 deaths. But something was different this time. A deviation from the grim pattern described in the clippings in George's diary. Besides my father, both Martha and the Jane Doe victim were locals, born and raised in this town, part of its fabric. Only my father was the true outsider, having moved here after meeting Eleanor while she was away at college. According to George's research, for the past 5 years at least, only outsiders had been targeted for the April sacrifices. Never locals. Why this sudden terrifying change? Why were 2 locals killed this year alongside my father? Martha's frantic warning scratched onto the bank card, her final desperate act, was clearly meant for me, a confirmation of George's plea. They had, both husband and wife, tried to warn me, urging me to flee. But George's diary also explicitly warned me to beware those with the yellow mark. A mark Martha herself bore. What did it all mean? Was Martha a victim or a participant who had a change of heart? Was the warning genuine? Or another layer of deception in this nightmarish town? The contradictions twisted in my mind, offering no clarity, only deepening the shadows. That evening, gathering my courage, I approached Eleanor as she sat reading in the living room, the picture of calm composure. "Mom," I began, trying to keep my voice steady, casual. "I wanted to talk to you about something. Since it's spring break soon, I was thinking, maybe I could go away for a few days? Just for a little trip. I've never really been anywhere outside the county, you know? And I'll be 18 soon. I just thought it might be good to see a bit more of the world." I watched her face carefully, trying to gauge her reaction, my heart pounding a nervous rhythm. The faint, placid smile that had graced Eleanor's lips vanished instantly, replaced by a chillingly dark, thunderous expression. Her eyes narrowed. She reached out and grabbed my shoulders, her fingers digging painfully into my flesh, her grip like iron. "Absolutely not," she hissed, her voice dropping low and venomous. "You are forbidden to leave this house right now. Your father just left me, Clara. Are you telling me you want to abandon me too? Now?" Her eyes, suddenly blazing, were shot through with crimson veins, her features twisting into a mask of possessive fury that terrified me more than anything I had witnessed yet. I recoiled instinctively, genuinely frightened by this sudden, violent transformation. Seeing my reaction, Eleanor seemed to realize she had gone too far. She released my shoulders abruptly, taking a shaky breath, her expression softening, slightly, morphing back into one of painful vulnerability. "I'm sorry, Clara," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "Forgive me, baby. I didn't mean to frighten you. It's just, with your father gone, I'm not myself. Please, darling." She looked at me, her eyes pleading now, glistening with unshed tears. Stay here with me. Just for a little while longer. Please. Just stay and keep your mother company. Is that too much to ask? As I looked at her, I realized with a jolt that she seemed to have aged years in just the past few days. The lines around her eyes were deeper, her skin paler, her energy depleted. My mind flashed through countless memories of her kindness, her unwavering support, her fierce love for me over the years. Doubt began to creep back in, insidious and confusing. Was I misinterpreting everything? Was this just grief manifesting in monstrous ways? Was the real monster the suspicion growing in my own heart? Okay, Mom. I finally whispered, the words feeling heavy, tasting like compromise. Okay. I'll stay. Her eyes welled up with genuine-looking tears of relief, and she pulled me into another tight, clinging hug. Oh, thank you, Clara. Thank you. My sweet girl. It felt like the first real embrace between us since Arthur's death. A fragile moment of connection in the swirling chaos. But as she held me close, I caught a faint, almost imperceptible scent clinging to her clothes, hidden beneath her perfume. It was metallic coppery, the faint, unmistakable smell of old blood. I wrinkled my nose slightly but didn't dare pull away, didn't dare let my mind dwell on the terrifying implications. Later that night, sleep was an impossibility. I lay rigid in my bed, eyes wide open in the darkness, every nerve ending frayed, listening to the silence of the house which felt heavier, more menacing than ever before. Suddenly, a thin sliver of light appeared under my bedroom door, followed by a long, distorted shadow stretching across the floor. There was something distinctly odd about the shadow projected onto the wooden planks. The figure's hand seemed to be holding something long and thin. The shape, even distorted by the angle, looked unnervingly like a sharp, gleaming kitchen knife. An icy tendril of fear snaked its way up my spine, tightening around my chest. The doorknob turned slowly, silently, with a faint metallic click. But the door didn't open. Whoever was outside clearly hadn't expected it to be locked. Earlier, before getting into bed, driven by a surge of nameless dread, I had quietly slid the bolt across, a precaution I now thanked God for. My eyes remained glued to the unmoving doorknob, my breath held captive in my lungs. It turned again, twice more insistently this time, testing the lock. Then, finally it stopped moving. After a long moment of silence, I heard the faint sound of soft footsteps retreating down the hallway. The shadow under the door vanished. I let out a shaky breath. I hadn't realized I was holding relief washing over me in a weak, trembling wave. But the relief was brutally short-lived. In the next instant, a horrifying prickling sensation crawled up the back of my neck, far worse than the phantom tickle from the night before. It felt like pure, concentrated malice, an intensely rude gaze boring directly into my back. Someone was watching me, right now, from behind. With a choked gasp, I whipped my head around, my eyes flying to the window overlooking the back garden. My blood turned to ice water. Eleanor's face was pressed hard against the cold glass pane, her features grotesquely distorted by the pressure, squashed and pale like a death mask. Her eyes, wide and unblinking, stared directly at me through the dark glass, her expression utterly terrifying in its blank intensity. "Mom, what are you doing out there?" I screamed, scrambling backward on the bed, pure terror lending strength to my voice. Slowly, unnervingly, the corners of Eleanor's lips curled upwards into a ghastly, unnatural smile that didn't reach her dead eyes. "I just wanted to check on you, sweetheart," she said, her voice muffled slightly by the glass, sounding chillingly calm. "I was worried you might be scared all alone in here. But the door was locked. I got worried when you didn't answer, so I just came around to the window to peek in." She held up the long, gleaming kitchen knife she still held in her hand, the moonlight glinting wickedly off the blade. "Since you're awake now, maybe Mama could cut you up some nice fruit? A little late-night snack." "No, Mom, I'm fine. Really," I stammered, my voice high-pitched with panic. "I don't need anything. I don't want any fruit. You should go back to bed. Get some rest." Looking at her pale, distorted face pressed against the window, her eyes fixed on me, the knife held loosely in her hand, my heart felt like it was going to beat its way out of my chest. "All right then, darling," she said, her smile widening slightly, becoming even more grotesque. "If you're sure, Mama will go back to bed now." She nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving mine, then turned and melted back into the shadows of the garden, vanishing as silently as she had appeared. I let out a long, shuddering breath, collapsing back against my pillows, my palms slick with cold sweat. My entire body was trembling violently. Just as my racing heart began to slow fractionally, my phone, lying forgotten on the bedside table, suddenly vibrated twice, the buzzing loud in the oppressive silence. With numb fingers I reached for it. A new text message had arrived. When I saw the sender's name displayed on the screen, my eyes widened slowly in stunned disbelief. The message was from Dad. "My dearest Clara," the message began, Arthur's familiar, loving tone somehow preserved in the cold digital text. "You must be very surprised, maybe even shocked to receive this message now. I set this up a while ago, a scheduled message just in case. I imagine by the time you're reading this, Daddy isn't there with you anymore. But please, my darling girl, you must remember this always. No matter what happens, no matter what anyone tells you, you can always trust your father. Daddy loves you more than life itself, forever and always. If you find yourself missing me terribly, Clara, go look through your old photo albums. The ones with pictures from when you were little all the way up. Look very, very carefully. I believe you'll find something important there. A new discovery awaits you." This final message, Arthur, reaching out from beyond the grave, seemed desperate to tell me something more, something crucial. Without a second thought, fueled by a surge of adrenaline and desperate hope, I scrambled off the bed, flung open my closet door, and pulled out the heavy, dust-covered photo albums stored on the top shelf. Albums filled with snapshots documenting my entire life, from birth until my teenage years. I sank onto the floor, opening the first album. The very first picture was of me as a newborn, swaddled in a pink blanket. Eleanor held me, her face beaming with pure, unadulterated maternal love, while Arthur stood beside her, smiling proudly, his eyes filled with adoration as he looked down at his daughter. A lump formed in my throat. I began flipping rapidly through the pages, years blurring past birthdays, holidays, first days of school. Normal, happy childhood memories. Until I reached a photograph taken when I was about 5 years old. In the picture, I stood grinning amongst a group of other children, our faces bright with summer sunshine and laughter. I remembered the occasion clearly. It was a kindergarten summer day camp outing to the local park. It was also the first time I had ever spent a significant amount of time away from my parents, a small step towards independence. Suddenly, my gaze snagged on something in the background, just at the edge of the frame. My hands started to tremble uncontrollably. Partially hidden behind the thick trunk of a large oak tree, standing just beyond the designated picnic area, was a lone figure. A woman. Her face was mostly obscured by the deep shadows cast by the leaves, but her eyes, pale and intense, were fixed directly, unblinkingly on me. Her face, what little I could see of it in the gloom, looked unnaturally, shockingly pale, almost spectral. The watcher behind the tree was Eleanor. Holding my breath, a cold dread creeping into my heart, I turned the page again, forcing myself to continue. A photo from when I was 12. Me and my best friend Sarah laughing as we built an elaborate sandcastle at the local park. I remembered that day vividly. Eleanor had told me she wasn't feeling well, that she needed to go to the doctor for a checkup and would pick me up later. But now, scrutinizing the background of the photograph, my blood ran cold. Partially visible beneath the green wooden slats of a park bench situated some distance behind us, almost completely hidden from view, was a tangled clump of long dark hair. Just hair. At first glance. But looking closer, I could see it belonged to someone lying flat underneath the bench, concealed in the shadows. The figure's head was bowed, the hair obscuring most of the face, but a single eye was visible, peering out from the dark strands. It was unmistakably Eleanor's eye, watching me. Even then, my hand clutching the photograph trembled so violently I could barely hold it steady. Another page turn. 14 years old. Me and Sarah again, this time squealing with excitement on the Ferris wheel at the county fair. This picture was a selfie I had taken at the very top, the ground spread out far below. I was making a peace sign at the camera, grinning inanely, utterly carefree. But looking at the photo now, a wave of profound nausea washed over me, chilling me despite the warm memories associated with the day. In the reflection visible in the plexiglass window of the gondola behind me, I could clearly see the occupant of the next cabin down. It was Eleanor, sitting alone, and she seemed to have noticed me taking the selfie. She was looking directly at my phone camera, her lips curved into a strange, tight, knowing smile that sent shivers down my spine. A strangled sob escaped my lips. Overwhelmed by a rising tide of horror and disbelief, I frantically dumped the remaining contents of the albums onto the floor, scattering photos across the carpet like fallen leaves. One by one, I examined them, my initial shock hardening into icy certainty. The discovery was utterly, monstrously terrifying. In almost every single photograph taken outside our home, especially those where I thought I was alone or just with friends, I could find her, Eleanor, lurking in the background, partially obscured, always watching, a face in a crowd, a reflection in a window, a shadow in a doorway. Even the time I'd spent the night at Sarah's house when I was 10. There was a photo Sarah's mom had taken of us asleep in twin beds. And there, horrifyingly, unmistakably, was Eleanor's head, emerging halfway from underneath my bed, her neck craned upwards at an unnatural angle, her wide eyes staring directly up at my sleeping form. All these years, all these seemingly innocent moments captured unknowingly by the camera lens, held a secret, sinister layer. All these bizarre, unsettling intrusions, meticulously documented without my knowledge. Because I hadn't looked through these old albums since becoming a teenager, consumed by friends and school, I had remained completely oblivious. Until now. Now I knew the horrifying truth. My mother, my seemingly loving, devoted mother, had been obsessively spying on me, stalking me my entire life. This was the final, terrible secret Arthur had wanted me to uncover. The secret hidden in plain sight within the snapshots of my childhood. A wave of profound revulsion and icy dread washed over me, leaving me feeling cold and utterly violated. I couldn't reconcile the woman in these pictures, the obsessive hidden watcher, with the mother I thought I knew. Suddenly, a faint, almost imperceptible sound drifted from outside my locked bedroom door. A soft shuffling sksksk sound. It was incredibly quiet, furtive, like someone walking on bare feet, trying desperately not to be heard. My heart leaped into my throat again. Scrambling, I quickly gathered up the scattered photographs, shoving them haphazardly back into the albums, restoring a semblance of order, my hands shaking uncontrollably. "Clara," Eleanor's voice whispered from the hallway, soft and questioning. "Are you asleep yet, sweetheart?" I held my breath, pressing my lips together tightly, determined not to make a sound. Silence stretched, thick and heavy. After a long moment, the shuffling sound faded, moving away down the hall. Eleanor seemed to have given up, moved on. I hadn't even begun to relax, hadn't dared to draw a full breath, when the soft, insidious sksk sound started up again, right outside my door. Closer this time. A truly terrifying, utterly chilling image formed unbidden in my mind. Eleanor tiptoeing lightly, silently back and forth, right outside my bedroom door like a caged animal, or a predator pacing outside its prey's burrow. The thought made the fine hairs on my arms stand on end, goosebumps erupting across my skin. Why would she be pacing outside my door like that? What did she want? "Clara." The whisper came again, closer now, right against the wooden panel of the door. "Are you asleep in there, baby?" Her voice was light, feathery, deliberately pitched low, almost crooning. It was the most terrifying sound I had ever heard. My nerves screaming, I remained absolutely still, frozen in place, holding my breath until my lungs burned, terrified to make even the slightest sound, betraying the fact that I was awake and aware of her presence. A long, agonizing silence followed from the other side of the door. No more sounds. No more whispers. Had she finally gone? Slowly, cautiously, moving with infinite care, I slid off the bed and crept silently towards the door. I pressed my ear flat against the cool wood, straining to hear any sound from the hallway. And then I heard it. Faint but unmistakable. The soft, rhythmic sound of breathing, coming from directly on the other side of the door. Eleanor was still there. Standing silently, waiting. My teeth began to chatter uncontrollably, clicking together despite my efforts to clench my jaw. This version of my mother, this cold, calculating, obsessive presence lurking just outside my door, felt utterly alien, terrifyingly moisung. A deep primal fear, colder and sharper than grief, took root deep within my soul. My desperate gaze flew to the window. Escape. I had to escape. Now. Get away from her, from this house, from this town. Moving with painstaking slowness and silence, terrified of making any noise that might alert her, I crept to the window. My fingers fumbled with the latch, finally managing to slide it open without a sound. Holding my breath, I climbed onto the sill and swung my legs out, dropping silently onto the soft grass of the back garden below. Once free of the house, the oppressive silence of the night pressed in on me. I ran, my bare feet stinging on the cold pavement, Down the empty moonlit street. There wasn't another soul in sight. The air was biting cold, and dressed only in my thin cotton pajamas, I began to shiver violently, my teeth chattering. Where could I go? Who could I possibly trust? After a moment of frantic thought, one place came to mind. My grandmother's house on the other side of town. Grandma. Surely Grandma would be safe. When my grandmother opened her door to find me standing on her porch, shivering and clad only in my pajamas in the middle of the night, her face registered shock, quickly followed by deep concern. And pity. Clara. Good heavens, child. What on earth are you doing out here like this? She exclaimed, bustling me inside quickly, her familiar warmth a momentary balm to my frayed nerves. She settled me on her comfortable floral sofa, wrapped a thick woolen blanket around my shoulders, and bustled off to the kitchen, returning moments later with a steaming mug of hot milk. Now then, she said kindly, sitting beside me, her brow furrowed with worry. Tell Grandma what's happened. Why are you out here all alone? I hesitated, the terrifying events of the past few days swirling chaotically in my mind. How could I even begin to explain? How could I voice the monstrous suspicion about my own mother? In the end, I couldn't bring myself to tell her the whole truth. It sounded too insane even to my own ears. Did you have a fight with your mother, dear? Grandma asked gently, seeing my hesitation. Did you run away from home? I mumbled a non-committal response, nodding vaguely, avoiding her gaze. Grandma sighed, patting my hand comfortingly. Oh, Clara. I know your mother can be strict sometimes, a bit demanding, especially now with your poor father gone. But she loves you dearly, child, more than anything. You know that. It's very late now. You look exhausted. Why don't you get some sleep here tonight? We can sort things out in the morning. Grateful for the refuge, however temporary, I nodded mutely. Grandma led me to the small guest room at the back of the house. I remembered staying here occasionally as a child, though not for many years. The last time I realized must have been at least 5 years ago. The room looked exactly the same, preserved in time, filled with her familiar scent of lavender and old lace. As I glanced around the cozy room, my eyes fell on a strange object placed prominently on the small bedside table. It was a small, intricately carved statue, perhaps 6 inches high. It depicted a grotesque figure with the head of a coiled serpent, but its body was a writhing mass of countless intertwined tentacles. Just looking at it made me feel deeply uncomfortable, a wave of inexplicable nausea washing over me. The feeling was bizarre, almost physical. My head began to throb with a dull, pulsing ache, and my eyes started to feel strangely strained and blurry, as if invisible hands were squeezing my brain. It was deeply unsettling. Why would my kind, conventional grandmother keep such a disturbing object in her guest room? But exhaustion, deep and profound, was quickly overwhelming me. The adrenaline that had fueled my flight was fading, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness. I crawled under the heavy quilt, the familiar comfort of Grandma's house lulling my immediate fears, and despite the strange statue pulsing faintly in my peripheral vision, I fell into a heavy, dreamless sleep almost instantly. Sometime later, in the deepest part of the night, I became aware of a sensation, a feeling pulling me reluctantly from the depths of sleep. Something cold, clammy, and vaguely sticky was gently, insistently stroking my arm, my face. My eyes snapped open wide in the darkness. The grotesque statue, the one that had been sitting securely on the bedside table, was now somehow lying on the bed beside me, nestled against my pillow. Its carved ruby-red serpent eyes seemed to gleam with a malevolent inner light as they stared directly, unblinkingly, into mine. With a cry of pure terror and revulsion, I scrambled away, kicking out violently, sending the statue flying off the bed. It hit the wooden floorboards with a sharp crack, shattering instantly into dozens of jagged pieces. From the broken shards, a thick, viscous, foul-smelling reddish liquid began to ooze out, pooling on the floor like blood. What in God's name was that thing? My heart hammering against my ribs, utterly terrified. I suddenly became aware of another sound in the house. A low, indistinct murmuring, a hushed whispering, like people deliberately trying to keep their voices down. The sound seemed to be coming from the room next door, my grandmother's bedroom. It sounded like Grandma was talking to someone. Driven by a new surge of adrenaline-fueled fear, I crept silently out of bed and pressed my ear flat against the thin wall separating the two rooms, straining to hear. Clara, that child. Running off like that in the middle of the night, straight to your house. Didn't even think to call me. I was frantic, absolutely beside myself. I was just about to call the police. It was Eleanor's voice. Cold. Annoyed. My blood ran cold. Eleanor was here. She knew I had come to Grandma's. My supposed safe haven was no sanctuary at all. A sliver of me tried to reassure myself. Grandma was here. Eleanor wouldn't dare try anything with Grandma present. Now, Eleanor, I heard Grandma's familiar, placating tones respond. You have to understand. Poor Clara just lost her father. She's just a child, really. Her emotions are all over the place. You need to be patient with her right now. Patient. Eleanor's voice sharpened, losing its pretense of concern, turning hard and suspicious. Mother, I suspect she knows more than she's letting on. I think Clara might have found out about our secret. My heart plummeted, sinking like a stone in my chest. They knew I suspected something. Nonsense, Eleanor, Grandma scoffed, though her voice sounded slightly strained. Clara's always been a bit unobservant. Sweet, but not the sharpest tool in the shed. I doubt she'd notice anything unusual. She wouldn't connect the dots. You underestimate her, Mother. Eleanor's voice turned shrill, laced with a sudden sharp paranoia. I think she knows. I suspect she's listening to us right now. Right through this wall. I held my breath, pressing myself flatter against the cold plaster, my entire body rigid with terror. But Eleanor, Grandma's voice sounded strange now, almost playful, distorted. How could she possibly know where we really are right now? At that precise moment, a jagged fork of lightning flashed outside the window, briefly illuminating the room, followed by a deafening clap of thunder that rattled the window panes. The small lamp in my room flickered once, twice, then extinguished completely, plunging the room into absolute, impenetrable darkness. A chilling realization washed over me, colder and more terrifying than anything before. My earlier assumption was wrong, horribly wrong. The voices weren't coming from the next room. They hadn't been. They were coming from inside my room. From directly beneath the bed, I heard a soft, wet scraping sound, a faint dragging friction, like something large, something heavy, slowly, deliberately pulling itself out from under the bed frame. With a choked gasp of pure, unadulterated horror, I spun around, my eyes wide in the suffocating darkness. Two heads emerged slowly from beneath the bed. My mother, Eleanor, and my grandmother. Their necks seemed impossibly, unnaturally elongated, stretched like grotesque rubber, allowing their heads to rise up beside the bed frame while their bodies presumably remained hidden underneath. Their faces were utterly devoid of expression, their eyes fixed on me with a cold, dead reptilian stare. Clara, Eleanor said, her voice flat, emotionless, yet somehow tinged with a horrifying amusement. A slow, thin smile spread across her lips, stretching them unnaturally. You were listening after all, weren't you? Naughty girl. Run. The single primal command screamed through my mind, overriding every other thought, every other fear. I turned and bolted, throwing open the bedroom door and stumbling out into the dark hallway. Behind me I heard their voices calling out, strangely calm, almost conversational. Clara? Where are you going, dear? Come back, child. Don't run away from us. I burst out of the front door and into the deserted street, running blindly, desperately, tears streaming down my face, my lungs burning. Mr. Henderson's warning echoed in my ears. Don't trust the police. They're part of it. There was nowhere to turn, no one to help. But something was profoundly wrong with the night itself. The usual nocturnal sounds, the chirp of crickets, the distant bark of a dog, the hum of electricity, had all vanished completely. The silence was absolute, unnatural, pressing in on me like a physical weight. It was utterly, eerily quiet. And then the sky began to change. Despite the late hour, the impenetrable blackness overhead started to bleed with strange, swirling, impossible colors. Sickly greens, putrid yellows, bruised purples, all churning together in nauseating patterns that made my head spin and my stomach heave. It was hideously beautiful and deeply fundamentally wrong. I stopped running, frozen in the middle of the empty street, staring up in stunned, horrified disbelief, trying to process the impossible spectacle unfolding above me. Suddenly, the sky itself seemed to tear open, like rotten fabric ripping apart. A vast, jagged black fissure opened up directly overhead, a wound in the very fabric of reality. And from within that impossible void, a single colossal obsidian black eye slowly opened, fixing its ancient, malevolent, hate-filled gaze directly upon me. A scream of pure terror tore from my throat, and I stumbled backward, collapsing onto the cold, unforgiving asphalt. In the next instant, as if commanded by that terrible eye, the streetlights lining the road flickered once, twice, then extinguished completely, plunging the entire town into an absolute, suffocating darkness. All light vanished. And from the impenetrable blackness at the far end of the street, I sensed something moving, something vast and amorphous, slowly, deliberately, approaching me. I couldn't make out its shape clearly. It was a hulking, shifting silhouette shrouded in a swirling black mist, radiating an aura of palpable dread. An ancient, cosmic horror that bypassed reason and struck directly at the primal core of my being. I felt a terror so profound, so overwhelming, it seemed to shred my very soul. Suddenly, an excruciating, blinding pain exploded inside my skull, as if my brain were being violently torn apart. And then, mercifully, oblivion claimed me. I drifted back to consciousness slowly, painfully. My first awareness was of lying on a soft surface, a rough blanket scratching against my skin. My head throbbed. Mercilessly. I blinked my eyes open, finding myself lying on a simple cot in a large, dimly lit, cavernous space. Stone walls rose around me, damp and cold. Standing silently around the cot, watching me with unnerving intensity, were Eleanor, my grandmother, and what seemed like most of the adult population of our small county town. Their faces were illuminated by flickering torchlight, and they were all looking down at me, their expressions disturbingly alike. A strange, unsettling mixture of fervent excitement and solemn reverence. "Clara, you're awake." "Good," Eleanor said, her voice calm, almost gentle, yet devoid of any real warmth. Where am I?" My voice was a dry, rasping whisper. My head felt like it was splitting open, as if a shard of ice had been driven into my brain and was being viciously twisted. "This is the place where everyone born in this town comes to receive the blessing," Eleanor explained patiently, as if speaking to a slow child. "Your coming-of-age ceremony, Clara. Once the ritual is complete, you will finally understand. You will see the necessity. You will understand Mama's difficult choices." Her hand reached out, stroking my cheek lightly. Her fingers felt impossibly cold, like ice, and left behind a faint, vaguely slimy residue on my skin. "Yes, Clara," my grandmother added, stepping forward, her eyes gleaming with an unnatural, fervent light. "Soon you'll truly be one of us. We've been waiting for this moment for so long. I always knew you were special." "What are you talking about?" I whispered, confusion warring with rising panic. "What blessing? What ritual?" Suddenly, as if on cue, the assembled townspeople bowed their heads in unison. A low, guttural chanting began to fill the cavern, a rhythmic, repetitive drone in a language I didn't recognize, yet somehow understood on a primal level. It was filled with profound malice, ancient hunger, and an indescribable soul-deep terror that resonated within my very bones. The fear within me magnified exponentially, consuming me, making my entire body tremble violently. As they chanted, they slowly raised their right arms in unison, and on every single forearm, stark against their skin in the flickering torchlight, was the same grotesque, twisted, sickly yellow tattoo I had seen on Eleanor and Martha. The mark of the believer. The mark George Henderson had warned me about. The crowd parted silently, creating a path, revealing what lay at the far end of the cavern. My breath hitched, freezing in my lungs. Before me stood a colossal statue, easily 20 feet tall, carved from some dark, oily-looking stone. My blood ran cold. It was the same grotesque figure as the small statue from Grandma's guest room, magnified to nightmarish proportions. A coiled serpent's head with glowing red eyes sat atop a writhing, repulsive body composed of countless, intertwined, pulsating tentacles. Just looking at it induced a wave of profound physical and mental nausea. It felt as if invisible, razor-sharp knives were flaying my nerves, stripping away my sanity layer by painful layer. My breathing became shallow and rapid, my vision swam, and the cavern seemed to tilt around me. The giant stone serpent head seemed to gaze down directly at me, its carved eyes filled with an ancient, predatory intelligence. It was, without question, the most terrifying, most unholy thing I had ever witnessed. Kneeling directly beneath the looming statue, bound tightly with thick ropes, was a lone figure. His head was bowed, his body slumped in defeat. It was George Henderson. His eyes were open but vacant, glassy, utterly devoid of recognition or reason. He looked completely broken, his mind seemingly shattered. I quickly lowered my gaze, unable to bear the sight of his degradation, the horrifying emptiness in his eyes. What is that thing? I choked out, my voice trembling, gesturing towards the monstrous statue. Eleanor turned her gaze towards the statue, her eyes filled with a burning, fervent adoration that chilled me more than any overt threat. He, she corrected me softly, her voice filled with awe, is our God, our protector, our salvation. She stepped forward and pressed a long, wickedly sharp, ceremonial-looking knife into my hand. The handle felt cold and strangely greasy. Now, Clara, she commanded, her voice ringing with authority. Go, kill the sacrifice. Offer his life to our God. This is your initiation. This is how you join us. This is your adult right. I stared at her, then down at the knife, then back at her face, utterly incredulous. She couldn't be serious. She had to be insane. Utterly, irrevocably mad. I'll do it, I heard myself say, the words emerging from my lips before I consciously formed them. A strange, cold calmness began to settle over me, pushing back the edges of panic. But first, you have to tell me everything. The real truth. Why? Eleanor sighed, a sound like dry leaves rustling. You will understand everything once you are truly one of us, Clara. Once you have received his blessing. But since you ask now, very well. I will tell you the story. She began to speak, her voice echoing slightly in the cavernous space. 40 years ago, this town was dying. A terrible plague swept through, swift and lethal. Half the population perished. No doctors dared to come near us. Outsiders shunned us. We were quarantined, abandoned, left here to die in misery and despair. Hope was a forgotten word. Then one night, one of the elders had a dream, a vision. In his dream he saw a colossal entity, ancient and powerful. A serpent's head, a body of infinite tendrils dwelling in the earth beneath us. When the man awoke, a single clear message was imprinted on his mind, a covenant offered in his moment of desperation. Every year in the month of April, 3 lives must be willingly offered in sacrifice, 3 souls given to him. In return he would cleanse the town of the plague and grant his faithful followers perpetual health, prosperity, and protection from all disease and worldly harm. At first people scoffed, disbelieving. But the man, desperate to escape the sickness consuming him and his family, carried out the first sacrifice himself. He simply strangled 3 weak, ailing individuals. Yet their bodies were found twisted into impossible, gruesome postures, marked by an unnatural, brutal force far exceeding his own strength. And after those first 3 deaths, the plague vanished. Overnight, everyone who was sick recovered. Health returned to the town. It was a miracle. From that day forward, the tradition has continued, unbroken. The April sacrifice became the cornerstone of our community, our sacred duty, our guarantee of survival. But, as the years passed, the sacrifices took their toll. Our population dwindled. We needed new blood, new generations to carry on the covenant. So we began encouraging suitable outsiders to settle here. Men and women brought back by those of us who ventured out into the world. To marry, to have children. To replenish our numbers. And every April, when the time came, these outsiders, these newcomers, became the preferred choice for the sacrifice. It was logical. Necessary. Your father, Clara. George Henderson. They were outsiders. From the moment they set foot in this town, their fate was sealed. They were always destined to be sacrifices. Only those born here, born under his watchful eye, can truly become his devoted followers, worthy of his protection. Your father, Arthur, he somehow discovered the truth. He learned about the sacrifices, about his own designated role. He knew he was marked for death. But he loved you too much, Clara, to simply abandon you or risk exposing you by telling you the truth directly. He feared what I might do. So instead, clever man that he was, he started leaving you clues, subtle hints, trusting in your intelligence to piece together the horrifying reality hidden beneath the surface of our quiet little town. Eleanor finished speaking, her gaze distant for a moment, then refocusing sharply on me. And now, Clara, she said, her voice regaining its firm, commanding tone. My story is finished. It is time for you to fulfill your destiny. Complete the final ritual. My child, you are a good girl, my grandmother interjected, stepping closer again, her face alight with that disturbing fervent zeal. You are intelligent, perceptive. Far more than I ever gave you credit for. From the moment you were born, I sensed it. He sensed it too. There is no one in this town more suited than you, Clara, to become his most cherished, most devout servant. He chose you, right from the very beginning. So you just killed Dad? I finally choked out, the cold calmness shattering, replaced by a wave of raw, burning anger. You murdered him and used him as a sacrifice? Like he was nothing. The image of Eleanor's tearful grief, her loving words, now seemed like a monstrous, obscene performance. The depth of her betrayal felt bottomless. And the thought of Arthur, knowing his fate, living with that terror, desperately trying to warn me while trapped in this nightmare. It was unbearable. Clara, he was merely a vessel, Eleanor stated coolly, her face twisting into a bizarre, detached expression that was far more terrifying than rage. An outsider. A necessary component. His greatest purpose, his only true value, was in helping me bring you into this world. You are what matters. One more question, I said, my voice dangerously low, fueled by cold fury now. If Dad was the designated sacrifice, what about the woman under your bed? And Martha Henderson? They weren't outsiders. They were born here. Ah yes, Eleanor nodded slowly. The woman, Sarah Jenkins, she was a true believer. She offered herself willingly, a devout sacrifice to appease him when the third outsider proved difficult to secure quickly enough this year. A noble gesture. But Martha. Eleanor paused, her expression darkening, a flicker of genuine anger flashing in her eyes. Martha Henderson betrayed him. She broke the covenant. She dared to try and help that wretched husband of hers, the intended sacrifice, escape his fate. She even tried to warn you. Such betrayal could not go unpunished. The God demands loyalty. He abandoned her to his judgment. Now enough questions, Clara, Eleanor commanded, her patience clearly wearing thin. My story is told. Your path is clear. It is time. She pushed the cold knife back into my hand, her eyes fixed on me with a fervent, expectant gleam. All around me, the townspeople watched, their faces alight with the same disturbing, cult-like anticipation. They leaned forward as one, their combined gaze heavy, demanding. Clutching the knife, my hands slick with sweat, I took a hesitant step forward, then another, moving slowly towards the bound figure of George Henderson. Kneeling beneath the monstrous statue, the low, guttural chanting intensified, swirling around me, pressing in on my mind. With every step I took closer to the statue, the throbbing pain in my head intensified, becoming almost unbearable. My vision blurred at the edges, shimmering with those impossible, nauseating colors I'd seen in the sky. A voice, ancient and cold, began to whisper insidious thoughts directly into my mind, bypassing my ears entirely. Kill him. Offer him. Become one. Power awaits. Gritting my teeth against the pain and the invasive whispers, I bit down hard on the inside of my own cheek, the sharp sting momentarily clearing my head. Then in one swift, decisive motion I spun around, not towards George, but using the sharp blade to slash downwards, severing the thick ropes binding his wrists and ankles. George! Run! I screamed, grabbing his arm, pulling him stumbling to his feet. Clara! No! You foolish girl! You cannot defy him! Eleanor shrieked behind me, her voice cracking with disbelief and fury. The assembled townspeople erupted in a collective roar of outrage and anger. They surged forward en masse, their faces contorted with rage, intent on stopping us, on reclaiming their sacrifice. But I had anticipated their reaction. We were already moving, scrambling towards the dark, arched entrance to the cavern. I shoved open the heavy, unseen door, dragging a disoriented but now moving George Henderson out into the unnatural twilight of the cursed town. George seemed to regain some measure of lucidity as we stumbled through the silent streets, the adrenaline perhaps clearing the fog from his mind. Clara, thank you, he gasped, his breathing ragged. But almost immediately, I felt his body growing heavier, his steps faltering. He stumbled, leaning heavily against me. I turned to look at him, urging him onward, and froze, my blood running cold at the truly horrifying sight that met my eyes. George's skin was moving, rippling and bulging unnaturally, as if something were alive and writhing just beneath the surface. He groaned, clutching at his chest, his face contorted in agony. He sank to his knees on the cold pavement, gasping for breath. Suddenly, with a series of soft, sickening, tearing sounds, his skin began to split open in multiple places, and from the ragged fissures dozens of small black, glistening eyes erupted, pushing their way through his flesh. They swiveled independently, focusing on me, their pupils dilating, filled with an ancient, profound malice and bottomless hatred. Clara, run. George choked out, his voice distorted, strained. I'm contaminated, corrupted. It got inside me. He gasped again, his body convulsing. Listen, what they worship, it's not a god. It's something older, darker. Purely evil. It pollutes the mind, the soul, twists people, assimilates them. His breath hitched. Your mother, your grandmother, all of them. They're already lost, consumed long ago. No reason left, just hunger. His will. His face was now a mask of utter agony, bleached white with pain. As he spoke, the dozens of newly emerged eyes on his body swiveled and blinked frantically, staring hatefully at me. Hearing the enraged shouts and pounding footsteps of Eleanor, and the pursuing townspeople rapidly approaching from behind us, I looked down at George, tears streaming down my face, my heart shattering. Then biting back a sob, I turned and ran, leaving him kneeling there, a sacrifice after all. I ran with everything I had, pushing my body harder than I ever thought possible, fueled by terror and grief, not daring to look back. I don't know how long I ran, hours perhaps, stumbling through the preternatural darkness, the town finally receding behind me. Eventually, utterly exhausted, my legs buckling beneath me, I burst out of the woods and onto the edge of a paved highway. The world seemed blessedly normal here. The first hint of true dawn was painting the eastern sky. Relief, potent and overwhelming, washed over me. My legs gave out completely, and I collapsed in a heap onto the cold asphalt at the side of the road. When I opened my eyes again, I was lying in a clean, sterile-smelling bed. Bright fluorescent lights hummed overhead. A hospital. A young nurse with a kind face leaned over me, smiling gently. Hey there. Welcome back. You gave us quite a scare. Collapsed on the highway. You feeling okay? I tried to nod, but my head throbbed protestingly. A sudden violent wave of nausea churned in my stomach, overwhelming and acidic. I gagged, leaning over the side of the bed, and began to vomit uncontrollably onto the clean linoleum floor. The nurse quickly rushed to my side, patting my back soothingly. It's okay, get it all out. And then amongst the bile, something else emerged from my throat. Something small, black, glistening and hideously alive. A single writhing fleshy tentacle, no bigger than my little finger. It flopped onto the floor, twitching obscenely. The young nurse saw it. Her eyes widened in disbelief, then horror. She let out a piercing, terrified scream. My own consciousness began to fray at the edges, dissolving into static. In that final moment of terrifying clarity, I finally understood. I hadn't truly escaped. It had let me go. Deliberately. It wanted to spread. Through me. I was the carrier. The vessel. Destined to unleash its corruption upon the unsuspecting world outside the cursed town. With the last vestiges of my strength, my fading will, I reached out a trembling hand towards the screaming nurse, my voice a barely audible croak. Kill me. Oh my God. Hang on. I'll get a doctor. Just hang on, she cried, backing away towards the door, her face pale with terror. No, please. My final conscious thought dissolved into nothingness. Darkness rushed in. Absolute and infinite, swallowing everything. Epilogue. Martha Henderson. I was born in a strange town. A town where, every April, exactly 3 people died. Horribly. When I was young, the stories, the hushed whispers terrified me. But my father, a devout man, told me not to worry. Death, the true death, the final ending, would never touch those born under his protection, those born into the covenant. We were chosen. Safe. When I was 15, my own mother died. The official story was natural causes, but whispers said she was strangled in her sleep. Yet, there were no marks on her neck, no signs of struggle. A healthy woman simply ceased to be. That was when the first seeds of doubt, the first hairline cracks in my faith, began to form. I started to watch my father, the other elders, more closely. Finally, my own initiation day arrived. My father, the elders, the whole town gathered in the cavern beneath the hills. They performed the ritual. And I saw him. The vastness, the power, the ancient, terrible presence they called God. My mind filled with strange languages, impossible geometries, visions of stars dying and universes being born. For a terrifying, exhilarating moment, I felt I stood outside time, seeing past, present, and future simultaneously. I accepted the ritual. I became one of them. I participated in the April sacrifices, year after year, pushing down the lingering sliver of doubt, the nagging wrongness of it all. To ensure the continuation of our line, To bring new blood, new potential sacrifices, into the fold. I was sent away to college, into the outside world. There, in the bustling anonymity of the city, I met a man. George Henderson. Kind funny decent George. When I was with him, the strange visions faded, the dark whispers in my mind grew quiet. The crushing weight of the town's secret seemed to lift, just a little. For the first time in my life I felt almost normal, almost happy. But I couldn't escape his pull. His command was absolute. Eventually, inevitably, I brought George back home with me, back to the town, knowing deep down what his fate would likely be. I lived in a state of constant, agonizing conflict. I knew George was marked, destined to be a sacrifice. Yet, against all reason, against his will, I found myself falling deeply, irrevocably in love with him. Then this spring I felt his attention turn towards George. The whispers intensified. This April George would be the chosen sacrifice. The pressure mounted. Voices in my head, not my own, urged me to fulfill my duty, to prepare him, even to harm him myself. I found myself doing strange things, watching him in the night, my actions controlled by something other than my own will. Yet, paradoxically, my love for him only deepened, becoming a desperate, aching shield against the encroaching darkness. When I saw the police leading George away in handcuffs, framed for murders he didn't commit, knowing Eleanor was behind it, I knew his fate was sealed. He would be sacrificed. I made a terrible, terrifying decision. I chose to defy him. To betray everything I had been taught, everything I supposedly believed in. To try and save the man I loved. Perhaps in the end there are forces in this universe too vast, too ancient, too powerful to truly defy. But maybe, just maybe, even those forces cannot entirely comprehend or extinguish the power of love. A love that can cross impossible distances, face unimaginable horrors, and risk everything, even damnation, for the sake of another. End.